Now candidate for House of Delegates in the 82nd District, Jason Miyeras, and he former bigwig in the Scott Ridgel organization and former assistant prosecutor, Commonwealth's attorney in Virginia Beach, and the 82nd District is in part of Virginia Beach, and this is for the seat that was previously represented by Bill DeSteff, who's running for state senate because Jeff McWaters is retiring. Jason, did I get the whole thing right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate rundown. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Oh, it's good to have
Appreciate
you.
it.
Now, you know what? I know about your mom's story, but I just played the ad that you sent me, and it by the way, great ad. I have to say that. Probably.
Thanks.
I mean, the ad is moving. But tell our audience a little bit about your mom, that whole story.
Yeah. Well, I think it's particularly for a first-time candidate, it's important for people to know who they are and where they come from, and it gives them a better idea of how they'd want to legislate. And I like to tell people just how my DNA is wired, that my story doesn't begin in Virginia Beach. I mean, this was largely where I've raised and lived the vast majority of my life. It begins in Havana, Cuba, where a scared 19-year-old teenager made a decision to literally flee communist Cuba with the clothes on her back, and she didn't know where her next meal was going to come from. And when you flee communism, it's so different than, say, if you and I were to try to immigrate to Ireland. You call your bank up, you transfer your bank account and your access and your deposits. You call a mover, you ship things overseas, maybe put some things in storage for when you return. In Cuba, what they do is the first thing is once the government, first you have to petition and beg the government to leave, and once they finally say yes, and it could be at any moment, the first thing is all the money in your bank account is now the property of the communist government. So you're literally penniless. Any money you've saved up in your life is suddenly the property of Fidel Castro. And then the second thing is you're homeless. So one of the last things that happens before you go to the airport is the communist thugs show up at your house. They come in, they do an inventory, and every single thing you have in your home, and think about this for your listeners, every picture, every personal note that you have, every maybe childhood toy, every piece of silverware, anything that you ever built up in your life that you thought maybe that was personal to you or maybe you would pass on to your future children is now gone. And they escort you out of the house. They put a seal on the door that says the property of the revolution. And so everything you've ever known in your life is taken from you. So you're penniless and you're homeless, and you get on an airplane. In this case, my mother immigrated to Spain and then legally came to the United States. But it gives you an enormous appreciation. As many problems as this country has, it gives you such an enormous appreciation for what this country is. And my mother left, and I thought it was so ironic. She left October 11th, 1965, and 50 years ago this month, her child is now running. You know, she left the country where there's no consent of the governed, and now 50 years later, her child is knocking on people's doors and shaking hands and asking people to elect them to represent them in the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere, the Virginia General Assembly. I think that's a great example of the genius of this country. As many problems as we have, I still believe what Ronald Reagan said, that the United States is the last best hope for mankind, and it's part of my DNA, and it's who I am, and I thought it was important for voters to know who I am.
Now, Jason, is your mom still with us?
She is. She lives in the district. She is very excited to be able to vote for me. She lives offshore Drive, and is an example of somebody who came here. I mean, my whole family. My uncle was the first to come. Uncle A.J. Miyeras. He was arrested during the Bay of Pigs invasion and suffered the humiliation of a mock execution. So he was the first to get out. And to give you an example of just what this country is, he also first went to Spain and then got to the United States. Landed in New York City, took an overnight bus to Greensboro, North Carolina, wanted a job, and he was trained as an accountant in Cuba, and his first thing he wanted to do was get a job, and his friend said, no, you got to learn English first. He said, no, I got to get my family out of Cuba. So the only thing available to him, there's a Howard Johnson off 85 in North Carolina, He got his friend to give him a ride up there, somehow convinced him to hire him, even though he didn't speak any English. And he changed his accounting suit basically for a dish boy. He worked there, eventually learned English, eventually got into accounting, and 20 years later, he was back at the same Howard Johnson leading an accounting seminar where he ran into his old boss from the kitchen, who didn't recognize him because he was wearing a coat and tie and was a professional. And I think that is just an example of if you come here, you work hard, this country, there's no limit to what you can achieve. And so that type of, that sense of the Miyeras stories of no excuses, I don't feel like this country owes me anything. But I have an enormous debt to what this country has given to my family, and I'm honored in a small way to be able to hopefully serve in the General Assembly.
Jason, that is such a compelling story. So what's your mom's name?
Miriam Maria Miyeras, yeah.
Miriam. Yeah. And so she's got to really be excited about this race, isn't she? Jason?
She's nervous at the same time, like any mom is, but she's very excited. I remember my mother became a citizen, and I remember going with her to the polls to vote for Ronald Reagan. I mean, that's one of my childhood memories, and it's why he's my favorite president. She felt like he was the first president that really understood that communism was evil. And in an era where, kind of quite frankly, what we face with Islamic radical terrorism, where people are afraid to call it what it is, which is evil, that at that time people forget. People derided Ronald Reagan, said that he couldn't use words like evil empire to describe them, that communism really wasn't that bad, that it was somewhat misunderstood, it was a reaction, and here is this guy who got up and called evil for what it was. I mean, communism and Nazism were the two greatest evils of the 20th century. And here was a man who got up and said what it was. And it is a bit ironic that you have a major candidate for president who's leading in the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, who somebody sent me an article back, I think it was in 1985. He was there praising Fidel Castro. I just think that is utterly, completely ironic that he's now leading contender for the Democratic nomination.
So, Jason, Terry McAuliffe, if you get elected and you're a big favorite to win, if you can get your people out, I think you're going to do very well. He's closing this election on tolls, which I find to be stunning. You're a lawyer. This deal we've got with the Midtown Tunnel, with the Elizabeth Crossing Company, this has got to be the worst deal ever made in the history of man. I mean, if Donald Trump ever saw this deal, his hair would catch fire immediately if he ever saw it, right?
My general attitude on anything that's public-private partnership is it better be a heck of a lot very private and very little public, and it needs to be very, very unique circumstances, and most importantly, the private entity needs to bear the vast, vast majority of the cost and the risk. And listen, I don't want to be Monday morning quarterback on how that deal was negotiated, but it is clear that the Commonwealth was left holding the bag. And it has had, I think, a devastating impact economically. And to my understanding, I was told yesterday that there was never a study really done to show what would the impact be of the tolls on our local business owners. And if you think about that, that is just such a great example of how government does things improperly. The law of unintended consequences is often the thing that runs the most common government programs. It starts off with a good intention, it gets implemented, and then the end result is not what they intended, but if anybody had actually taken the time to really think and analyze, they could have seen this coming. So whether any provisions in the contract to revise, I mean, as an attorney, that's really hard. Most courts will simply, the four corners. They'll look at the four corners of the document, and they're not going to allow any type of oral side agreements. That's irrelevant. They're going to look at what's in the document. So it's a very, very difficult provision. I think it's had a very, very negative impact. And I'm not a fan of tolls in general, mainly because we've seen where they've been implemented and they haven't really worked. In Richmond, they have the downtown expressway, and that was built if I remember correctly, in the 70s, and they still owe as much money today as they did when the downtown expressway was first built, and they've been paying tolls for 35, 40 years. So I think tolls are not the way to go, but this could be a thorny issue for sure if I get up there.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to get under it and see what the deal is. Also, you're going to be involved in this I-66 $17 toll. You're going to be involved in that if that does go through. We just had Caucus Chairman Tim Hugo on, who said he was going to try to get legislation in to overturn that. McAuliffe would veto it. Then you got to get 2/3. So you're going to be involved in it. We're out of time. We want to thank Jason Miyeras for being with us.